Perfect. Here we go. And the podcast. Welcome back to another episode of Invest in Your Future. I'm your host, Kenny, CEO of Kirunda Group Corporation. Thank you guys for joining me for another episode. Today, I have a special guest. I'm so glad to have on the phone and the mic. He is doing big things in the mobile home park. He's doing great things in business and such an early stage. So I want to bring on my special guest, co-founder of Archimedes Group. His name is Ryan Narus. He's also host of Mobile Home Park in Real Life podcast, a great podcast I've listened to multiple times, learned so much from. You guys should definitely take a listen to that also. Ryan has a degree in psychology, statistics from Wake Forest University, went back to get his MBA specializing in business analytics, marketing, and operations. After college, Ryan worked in securities with Wells Fargo Leadership Group. A year later, found his courage to start his own business with his partner and started purchasing mobile home parks and turning them around for profits for himself and his investors. Just in 3 years, his business has accumulated over 500 units. He has a wealth of knowledge, not only in mobile home park business, but also just in the brain and in terms of psychology. We can learn so much from this special guest. So Ryan, thank you for joining me. And you want to introduce yourself?
I do. First off, I am flattered. Thank you for all the kind words, man. I'm just trying to keep up with you. And I'm trying to convince you to come back down south, man.
Oh,
nice and warm down here.
Oh, trust me. It's freezing over here, and I just scrapped my car with the snow, and it's just terrible, man. I think you're gonna have me down there soon enough. Soon enough, trust me. So, Ryan.
Yeah, that polar vortex is for real, man.
Oh, definitely. You're glad you're down there, but I really want to dig in because we have so much to cover, and I really want to get into as much as I can because I'm going to learn so much from you also, and I hope my audience learns so much from you also. So Ryan, let's just start from the beginning. Why psychology, first of all?
So this is kind of a little silly story, but when I was really young, we all have pressures to be popular growing up. And for me, I kind of realized I was the annoying kid, the ADHD, high energy, just silly kid. And we all want to be popular, right? And so what I kind of devised at a really young age was, well, why don't I observe the quote-unquote popular people and then just take their best qualities and merge that into myself, right? So as a young child, I basically put up a facade of an amalgamation of other people's behaviors until I developed confidence to become myself and be comfortable in my own skin. So through that process, I guess I didn't realize that was psychology. And when I reached college, I really wanted to be an engineer, and because I love math.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized in physics class that I loved physics, but I absolutely hated calculus. Just hated calculus.
Yes.
And kind of in college, I went through that process. I think we all do to a certain degree of just self-discovery. And I just discovered I really love people. And not only do other people kind of do something similar to me, which is kind of observe people and try to understand their behavior, but also there was an entire science behind it. And I took an intro to psych class and just fell in love with it from there.
Wow, that's interesting because psychology is a tough major. I can't imagine just picking that as a major and going to a high level school like Wake Forest for it. But that's interesting. So you just hated the math on the other side, so you went on the brain side. And from let's say from psychology, do you say it's helped your business having that psychology background? Because that's not a typical entry into a business of, like, let's say, real estate. Would you say psychology has helped you in terms of your networking, in terms of how to get into the round of business at all?
Absolutely. So what I made a pretty big pivot in college, undergrad, when I went from going, I want to be an engineer, to I want to be a salesman. And so I figured psychology and sales was a pretty good fit. Now, I still love math. Calculus and I just don't get along. So I was, as you alluded to earlier, a statistics minor. But basically what I figured in college is, hey, I love persuasion, and I love selling, and I love talking, and I love teaching, and I love people, but I also like math too. And so I figured sales was a good career, and I got into sales after I graduated undergrad. And in sales, I realized, I love sales, but so I sold cars for 4 years. And what I realized while I was selling cars is, you sell a car, you make a commission, it's done. It's gone.
Yes.
Whereas in real estate, you convince someone to sell their property to you, and then it cash flows. And so to me, I kind of realized that in my mid-20s, and I realized, hey, I got to do it. I got to find a way to, if I'm good at building relationships, then I should be able to do more than just make a commission or a couple commissions if I sell them a couple cars. So to answer your question a little more directly, psychology is huge. Excuse me. Psychology is huge for me because, number one, it helps me with persuasion when I go to buy a property. It helps me when I go to sell a mobile home. So we got our dealer's license in South Carolina.
Nice.
So we can sell mobile homes in South Carolina. So it helps me there. It also helps me with debt collection, which is a big portion of my business. It helps me with my employees.
Wow.
For anybody out there who's ever had a bad boss, I have learned many things from bad bosses that I desperately try. Like, I'll give you a good, for example, one of our employees was sick yesterday, and I got on the phone with her, and I told her, anything you need, you let me know. If you need to take tomorrow off too, you let me know. I am thinking about your health and your happiness. And at the same time, you also have to be firm with them when they make a mistake, and you have to allow them to save face when they make a mistake so they can still learn something. But one thing I learned at the car dealership, by the way, is when you make a mistake at the car dealership, you get yelled at. Mm-hmm. And I realized that never works. I saw this time and time again. It was so easy to just lie to your sales manager when you make a mistake because you don't want to get yelled at. And I think the right answer there is to encourage your employees to come to the realization that they made a mistake on their own and that they need to improve that on their own rather than yelling at them, right?
Yes.
Like, hey, you gave the customer the invoice price. That was a mistake. That was a big mistake that might cost you this deal, right? Telling them that in the moment will encourage them to lie to you instead of giving you the vital information of, hey, boss, I made a mistake. I gave them the invoice price. Now how do we rectify the situation and not make it harder to sell this car right now because now I'm trying to save face and avoid getting yelled at, right? So what I try to do in my business to incorporate psychology is to try to be firm when a mistake happens and help them to realize how to rectify it in the future, but at the same time encourage honesty. So if a mistake happens, I can gather all relevant information and we can solve that together. So it's everywhere. Psychology is everywhere. I'm a Buffett and Munger fan myself, and they preach psychology. And I find they're absolutely right. You need incentives to align. You need to avoid lying. You need to trust but verify. And then obviously the sexy things like negotiation and persuasion in terms of buying and selling stuff is also a huge portion of it. So everywhere. Psychology is everywhere.
I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, that's so great right there, Ryan. You have that background that just helps you deal with people on such a higher level because you've studied the brain and you study psychology. And that's actually interesting because I'm starting to read some books on psychology too, because you realize the marketing, you realize that it comes down to, pleasing another person's, mentality. So it's just interesting. It's very interesting that I've never put the two together, but it just works almost, congruently, because obviously you have to deal with people on a daily basis. So you should learn how the brain works. You should learn about, motives and incentives. That's why I think a lot of my listeners can learn from is, you have to come on the nice side. You have to come on the positive side, not the negative side, like you said, of yelling and, punishment. You have to come on the side of, there's a reward at the end of it.
It's true. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has a great quote in that book where he says, in so many words, borrowing strength builds weakness. And obviously it's a much more complicated and eloquent quote than that. But in so many words, what he means there, because you can unravel this a million ways, is that essentially when you use force by strength or by yelling and screaming or using authority, like, well, I'm your boss, you have to do what I say. Every time you do that, you basically hamper trust.
Wow.
And it's superior to to be firm with someone, right? Because you don't want to get walked all over. But at the same time, you want that respect to drive your power and your efficacy as a manager and a leader rather than tour de force, right? Rather than yelling and screaming or intimidating.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they always say it's an old saying too. So I'm thinking like an African proverb where you get more with honey than the lemon. So that's great. That's great, Ryan. So let's talk a little bit about from the transition from, let's say, you finish college and you start working, selling some cars, started making some money. When did you start dabbling in real estate? Or like, how did you get into real estate? Like, how did you learn about it? Can you tell me a little bit story about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So at a young age, I'd say, I think it was about 23, 24 years old. So my first full year at the car dealership, I did something kind of interesting. I was terrified. First off, I was terrified that I wasn't, because it was commission only and I'd never sold. And you hear all these rumors about scummy car salesmen and blah, 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 blah. And I was terrified that I was going to fall on my face. So I read everything I could. I created all sorts of my own training programs. And then what I did was I went, well, I understand psychology. I can start experimenting and getting feedback. And then also I can use my statistics background. And what I did, similar to the movie Moneyball, where they found out that in baseball, the key statistic is on base percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I figured out that the most important statistic in the car dealership was the write-up, which is where you sit down and with people at your desk and you show them numbers. And what that did is revolutionize my game, because then my goal was, even if folks, hey, I'm not buying today, hey, my wife isn't here, my husband isn't here, my dad isn't here, whatever objection, hey, look, while you're here, why don't we just go over some numbers so you have more information to think about, right? And just that line alone skyrocketed my closing percentage, because you get to that next step in the funnel. And I've uncovered that with psychology, or with statistics rather, but I also figured out that people just don't walk through the front door till about 10, 11 a.m. And then they stop walking through the front door after about 3:30, 4 p.m. So what I did was I went, first thing in the morning, you make all your calls. Then in the afternoon, you make some more calls. In the middle of the day, that's when you want to be on the front door. And another big important lesson I learned there was there's a difference between being productive and being active, right? So in other words, if you feel like you're doing something, that may not be the highest and best use of your time. Long story short, I discovered all of this stuff just through selling cars, to only come to the realization that, oh my gosh, this is not sustainable at all. I'm working like 60, 70 hours for a decent wage, but oh my God, I'm giving my entire life to this. If I get promoted to the F&I office, I'm giving even more of my life. Then I go to the sales desk, and it's more time, more pay, right? More time than it's the general sales manager, then it's the general manager, and every step up is a step farther away from what I want in my life, which is the ability to spend time with my family and to do what I want and to make my work meaningful to me so I'm happy. So in other words, I went through this long process of putting in a ton of time into something that I ultimately walked away from feeling stuck. Going up, being promoted is not an option. Going out is probably not an option either, because a lot of the skills that I had at the car dealership wouldn't necessarily transfer to other sales jobs. So I'd be starting at the bottom. So in other words, I felt really, really, really stuck, which I'm sure a lot of folks that are listening in also feel, just stuck. And it's one of the worst feelings ever, to feel like you're smart and hardworking, but stuck. And so in that process, I went, I refuse to be stuck. And so I started reading everything I could and two books changed my life: 4 Hour Work Week
Tim
and
Ferriss.
Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And Rich Dad Poor Dad made me realize that my skill sets and my passions fit real estate. So then at 24, I bought my first home. It was a 3-bedroom townhouse. I moved in 2 of my buddies, and that was my first experience in real estate. It went horribly. It went very, very badly because when you have your friends, you're not a good landlord. And obviously I didn't have a lease because I was a knucklehead.
Of course.
And I hate to say this, but they were 2 of my best friends, and I don't talk to them anymore because of what happened, which is so sad. But at the same time, you have to make those mistakes. And then I realized when I went back to business school that I should probably be looking for something in real estate. And then, boom, I met my business partner, Ian.
Mm-hmm.
And he was working for a Fortune 500 real estate REIT at the time, and our skill sets and our ability to disagree and our passions and everything just fit perfectly. And we realized we were meant to be real estate entrepreneurs together, and then we found the mobile home park niche all in that. So there's a really long-winded way to answer your question. If I was to distill it down, Rich Dad Poor Dad,
Sure.
buying my first home together, and then actively looking for years and years and years and years and years and educating myself along the way.
That is huge. I mean, Ryan, you just dropped so many gems there. Obviously, partnering obviously helped you, but finding great partners and people that compatible with, that's what you should focus on. If you're trying to do something like the way Ryan is doing, is he found great people around him and he grew himself. Like he took his own, his own goal and went and started finding some books and some things to help him change his mindset because he felt like he was stuck. So if you guys feel like you're stuck, you could easily do the same exact thing that he's done. You could just, grow yourself and get some good partners. And next thing you know, now Ryan's big in mobile home parks, which is obviously, I love that niche too. I have some Ryan too. So, do you want to, for those people who are not familiar with mobile home parks, could you just give us a little synopsis on mobile home parks and why you love them the way I do?
Yeah. So first off, I think the most appealing. So there's a lot of hype around the industry, which I systematically debunk in my podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I could talk about the hype, but I think really at the end of the day, the most appealing thing about mobile home parks is not mentioned even in my own podcast. The most appealing thing to me in mobile home parks is the fact that you can get into it relatively easily with nothing. So later on this afternoon, I am going to upload an episode called Starting With Nothing to my podcast, where I detail out how I began with no network, no money, and no experience in the mobile home park industry.
Mm.
And it's not just an episode for mobile home parks, it's an episode for really anything. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be really, 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 really hard, but you can do it. And that's kind of the point I want to make with that episode, and the point I want to drill down to answer your question about mobile home parks is,
yes,
you don't need millions of dollars to get started. You don't need tons of experience to get started.
That's true.
And that, to me, is the most appealing thing about the industry. Yeah, it's cool that there's an inherent supply cap because counties don't want to build them. So it's difficult to get the zoning. Yeah, it's appealing because it'll cost you $5,000 plus to move a mobile home out of a community, so you have an inherent barrier to exit for your tenants. Yes, there's a huge need for affordable housing. So the hype things are definitely there. But like I said, for those who are like me a couple of years ago, not that long ago, where I felt stuck and I had no money or experience or any network.
Yes.
It was a wonderful, wonderful medium to begin my journey as an entrepreneur.
That's I mean, you found the perfect niche at the perfect time, huh?
Well, like the Chinese proverb says, the best time to start was 20 years ago. The second best time to start is right now.
It's right
So
now.
I would definitely not say I came in at the right time. I would say Sam Zell came in at the right time in the early 90s, billionaire now. And yeah, coming in at about 2015, a couple of years ago, was definitely a good time to come in. But man, some folks that got in decades ago are just absolutely swimming in it now.
Wow.
So I definitely wouldn't use the word perfect timing, but I will say this to all the listeners out there: don't be discouraged by oh, well, timing's not right. Well, it's like kids. Timing is never going to be right unless you win the lottery and you can hire your own nanny. Timing is never going to be right to have a child. It's the same thing with your business.
Well, that's true. Because for me, Ryan, I found out a little bit late also. I'm not going to lie. I found out because I was originally looking for apartment buildings. I was looking for, the typical, 20 or 30 units, something to get me started. And it's the same, close to the same story. I just kept seeing mobile home parks on the side, but I never understood the business. I never understood it. And I never really took it serious until I started really doing my research and digging and found out that, you can explain the business because you're in, obviously, but I love the fact that you can own something that produces income, and it's easy to enter into, which is easy entry, but then also it can grow. You can add more homes. You can, fix up the homes, increase them. You can sell the homes. You can, could you just talk us a little bit about the benefits of mobile homes? Just the whole business.
Absolutely. So I'll give you a good, for example.
Yes.
I had an awesome interview with John Fedrow. He's a quote unquote Lonnie dealer. And basically what he does is he'll buy a mobile home, fix it, and flip it. Now, here's the appeal to that. You can get a mobile home for $5,000, sometimes way cheaper than that. It's pretty simple to fix. It can get outrageously expensive. But what I ran into at 24 years old, buying my first rental property / FHA loan that I lived in and rented out to my buddies, what I found there is I had to come up with a down payment, and then I had this massive amount of debt on hand, and the cash flow wasn't good enough for me to be able to go and just start gobbling up and scaling up a business, right?
Yes.
Because I needed a lot of capital and a lot of debt, and I still needed an income with which to obviously eat. So the cool thing about mobile homes is a lot of times you don't need to get debt. If you just do the Lonnie dealer thing and just do the mobile home itself, you don't need to go and get debt. You can buy $5,000 homes, fix them, flip them, and you can rent them for relatively the same amount as a small single family home. So you go out and you spend $45,000 to $90,000 buying a home, and then you get $600 to $1,000 a month in rent, or you spend $5,000 on a mobile home, you rent it out for $500 to $700. There's not a giant delta between that, but the amount of capital difference is huge. So it's appealing in that regard. Now, taking that one step further to the mobile home park itself,
yes,
the cool thing is you are able to get seller carry. So now I've had a lot of trouble finding seller carry options. Last week we closed on our first seller carry, which is really cool because you can do non-recourse, because a lot of the little properties that I've bought, I personally have recourse on. And the problem with taking out recourse is obviously if it fails, they come after all your stuff.
Exactly.
But more than that, if you're starting with nothing like I did, a bank isn't gonna. I'm not gonna be able to put up collateral because I don't have any money. What are they gonna do? Come after my Honda Fit? I don't have anything they can come after. So I have to introduce an investor who is willing to stomach that risk, as well as stomach the growing pains that I was going through as a new operator. But again, to what you were saying earlier about finding the right partners, if you find the right investor partner who's willing to stomach that risk, obviously for a little bit more returns than normal, you can find a wonderful situation, which I have with our main investor. But advantage being, you can go and gobble up these properties for, I'll give you, for example, we bought Eastgate Mobile Home Park for $1 I believe it was $465,000.
Mm-hmm.
Capital raise was about $150. Had to bring on an investor because it was a recourse loan. But it was 42 lots at, I think it was $170 a month, and we bumped the rents closer to market, and don't own any of the homes. It's direct build, water and sewer.
Wow.
Basically, we went in there, we fixed the roads, we cut down some trees, we put in some lights so people would feel safer. We got out some bad tenants. We brought in some good new tenants. We fixed collections issues. We did a bunch of work, but now the property is worth a whole lot more because it was owned by absentee owners, and now we're very hands-on with the property. And for $150,000 plus bringing in an investor to help you get a recourse loan,
sure,
that's not that big of a deal relative to having to raise millions to buy a portfolio of single-family homes or storage or apartments. So that to me is a really big appeal to it. And then, like I alluded to earlier, it's really expensive to move homes out. So a lot of times when people default, you can negotiate with them. And it's very difficult to develop out new ones for new mobile home parks. So if someone buys the property next to you, demos it, and then builds a mobile home park next to you, they have to bring in homes, they have to do all this infrastructure, and on and on and on. It's really, really, really expensive to do that. At the moment, it is still cheaper to buy pre-existing mobile home parks than it is to develop one. I suspect in the future that might change, and counties will change their opinion of it, but of mobile home parks and affordable housing in general. And what will happen is, in time, you'll start to see more development because there's not a lot of development. But what that does for you is that gives you an inherent supply cap. So in other words, I don't have the fear of someone coming in next door, building a bigger, better, cheaper to live in mobile home community than mine and just torch me and run me out of business. So that's really, really appealing too. So yeah, there's a lot of really appealing aspects to this niche.
Wow. I mean, that's so much information, right? I appreciate that. I mean, I know about the business because obviously I have some parks myself. What would you say, because obviously you've been in the business now, you have investors that you work with. Would you say the easiest road in terms of, let's say, starting to buy a park, would you say, like, is there, a certain number the person should be looking for, a certain area? I mean, where should people start looking if they want to start getting into the niche of mobile home parks?
So you and I talked about this. This is going to be a little bit of a sidetrack.
Sure.
I think that, so to just directly answer your question, I think that you as in the listener, need to start by discovering who you are and what you want out of it. Now, I personally, my first day, Ian and I, my business partner Ian and I, our first day, what we did was we sat down and we mapped out what we want in our life and what we want in our career. And how we were going to get it.
That's big.
And that has made decision making and lead sourcing and everything so much easier because we have very specific markets, very specific properties that we go through. So if you have a database like I do, which is about 1,400 entries, and you're working full time, it's very difficult to do the outreach to all of those properties, 1,400 properties. I did the math on one of my episodes where I revealed my lead generation secrets. That I could only, if you do the math, it only comes out to 2 or 3 touches a year. And that's just a lot of times not enough outreach. So if you can make your target a bullseye, you will be much more efficient with your time. And you and I were talking about so that's kind of to directly answer your question, that you just need to figure out where your time is best spent, and you need to figure out who you are and what you want out of it. Now, to kind of tell a little bit of a side story, when I broke up with this girl in some point in 2012, she totally broke my heart. And I just kind of had this realization that I could continue to feel sorry for myself, or I could go do something about it. And one thing I realized about myself was I've always been a scrawny, I'm about 6 foot tall, and I weigh, 160, 170 pounds at the time. And I realized I'm a scrawny kid, and I need to maybe what I need to do is just reinvent myself and just start hitting the gym, start powerlifting rather than running.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though I have a runner's body, maybe what I'm missing out on is just this like jacked body, and that'll attract the right woman, right? So I think we all have been there, where male, female, whatever, we've had that moment where we feel inadequate to a significant other, and we go out and kind of change our lifestyle. And what I did was I just got super into powerlifting. I mean, protein shakes, the meals, the leg day once or twice a week, and I'm at the gym 6 days out of 7 days of the week, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I remember not long after I met my wife,
Mm-hmm.
and she told me, she said, I don't really care for big muscly guys. And as soon as she said that, I was done. I don't think I've been to the gym then.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of funny story about the gym is really relevant to entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And if you kind of use my experience at the gym as a proxy for wanting to be an entrepreneur, it matches really well. Because for me, going to the gym, yeah, it was fun, but I didn't really love it to the degree that would help me bust through the plateaus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of those programs out there like, oh, hey, buy the ab blaster and you'll have abs like this dude or this woman on this commercial that is an obvious model that probably never has eats carbs, and they just have these, it's just ridiculous, right? Like, oh, go buy this or go do this or drink my product or buy my sneakers or this, that, the other thing, right? They're hyping up something when the truth about lifting is you have to be on a strict schedule. You can realistically only put on so many pounds of muscles a year. If you are powerlifting, you are not going to be cut if you don't also do cardio.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, you could be this big jack dude that is just a blob because all you're doing is eating and lifting weights. You're not running or doing cardio, so you're not getting that Arnold Schwarzenegger cut look. So in other words, what you end up doing is you go through this big rigmarole where you put your hopes and your dreams in a product or an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And you spend your time and your money only to realize, like, if you ever even get to, because some people just can't get cut. It's just physically very difficult to, number one, sustain or even get to. So you have these ridiculous dreams that are not ridiculous in your mind because the information you're absorbing is from these people who are outstanding at marketing. And they peer into your soul, find what's missing, and then convince you that their product is going to fill that hole. And then they are very persuasive to get you to go buy their product. And it's for me in powerlifting, it wasn't about powerlifting, it was about finding my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I found her, I gave up. And for me, I talked to a lot of folks trying to get into the real estate industry. For me, I was pleasantly surprised to find meaning and purpose in what I did in the mobile home park space. For me, mobile home parks were the medium to fill that hole, fill that void, help me to remove that feeling of being stuck. But it was also the end goal. And so all the incentives aligned. And it wasn't that way in powerlifting, right? Because I got into powerlifting as a medium to meet a woman. That was wrong, and it was inherently going to fail. And when you start your real estate journey, if you don't start by asking who you are, what you like and what you don't like, and you make it as simple as I just did, well, I'm powerlifting to find a woman, because at the time it wasn't that simple. At the time I was powerlifting, it was fun. At the time, it wasn't as clear to me that I was just doing it to attract a woman. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap in real estate where they have this void that they're trying to fill. They feel stuck. They feel unfulfilled. They don't have meaning and purpose. And I think what has happened and will happen, unfortunately, to a lot of people is they fill this void with a hype story like a mobile home park being the way to passive income and the way to quit your job and to escape feeling stuck. Yeah. That void in your soul is being filled by something that potentially could be a terrible, terrible thing. Because I talk about this on my podcast that I read as much as I could, and I listened to all these podcasts, and I talked to all these people, and I had an idea of what mobile home parks was, and then I was pleasantly surprised to find out that was not the case. It was very, very, very different, but in a very good way because I found meaning and purpose and my skill set matched. So I was pleasantly surprised, but I meet a lot of people, accountants, salespeople. I even know a principal of an elementary school who may or may not, his skill set may or may not fit. And he may be the opposite of me and may be unpleasantly surprised and have quit his job and put up all of his money to find out he hates it. And now he's in an even worse position because he can't just go back and be a principal. Right? Now he's got recourse debt over his head in a job he hates that he's created for himself, and he's limiting his upside because all of his money is tied up and he's got to use his dividends and his asset management fees to eat. So, in other words, it could be a nightmare. So that's why I say over and over and over again on my podcast, start with why. Figure out you. Figure out what's missing in your soul that you think real estate and entrepreneurship is going to fill. And then if you find that, yes, it is real estate, it is owning my own business, then realize it's going to be really, really difficult, but you can do it.
That's big. That's huge, Ryan. That's I think you mentioned so many great things there. I think a lot of people, like you mentioned, a lot of people try to use real estate and they don't understand how to really do the bit. They really don't understand what it takes, like you mentioned. So I think a lot of people try to use it for the wrong thing. Like you said, you have to first build yourself to understand that real estate is going to be a thing, because you might think it's real estate, but it actually might not be, like it's a different game than, playing the stock market or doing something else different. And the way you mentioned that if people understood that they have to build themselves first, then they can find if real estate's their thing. Don't try to fit it into something that's empty, like you mentioned. Great point, Ryan. Great point. Could you give us a little bit about your business model? Explain a little bit about the Archimedes Group and what you guys really do in terms of once you get a property and how you get a property. Could you give us a little bit of walkthrough about your business model?
Sure. So one big lesson I got from my strategy professor at Wake Forest when I was doing my MBA was if you get into a mature industry, so real estate in general is a pretty mature industry, there's not going to be a whole lot of innovative, disruptive technology coming in. You can argue maybe 3D printing or tiny houses, but realistically, there's not a whole lot of potentially disruptive technology entering. And whenever you have that, you need to constantly be looking for alternate revenue streams. And just as a business person in general, you should always be looking for ways to provide value in exchange for money. So for me, I look at a few things. Number one, I've gotten really good at operating. So I speak Spanish. It's not good, but it works. I would say funciona, which means it works, or es bastante, which means it's enough. Mm-hmm. I can do that. I've operated. I've had, not at one time, about 1,000 lots under my belt. I've done so much from a property management turnaround thing that I can actually and have taken on consulting gigs for profit. So I can monetize my skill set that way. Wow. I can sell mobile homes because I'm licensed in the state of South Carolina. I can make money that way. So Ian just got his brokerage license. So for any time we find an opportunity that doesn't fit our core business, which is buying properties, turning them around, and sitting on them and having them big cash flowing assets, we can also monetize our lead generation that doesn't fit our core business model, right? So ultimately, there's a bunch of ancillary ways for us to make income, as well as just sourcing deals and buying deals. Now, so to answer your question about how do we find deals, well, basically we have a big database and we show up at front doors sometimes. I did that last week and I called the lady 2 days ago to follow up with her. And I just used my salesmanship that I developed at the car dealership. And I build these relationships with folks, make them comfortable with me, tell them what I'm about, see if I'm a fit for them and what they want. And the cool thing is not only can I use that to buy properties, but now with Ian involved, I can basically, if it's not a fit for us, I can pitch it over to Ian and Ian can pitch his brokerage services and we can find other ways to make money. So in other words, as an entrepreneur and as a business person in general, you just need to constantly be looking for what can I do that makes somebody else's life better off, so much so that they'd be willing to give you money in exchange for your product or your service. So I'm constantly looking for those things, but those are just a handful of things that I've found that I can monetize.
That's fantastic, Ryan. You can make money. Like he just mentioned a great point, which is not just one stream of income. He has multiple ways of making money, and he's always constantly trying to find ways to make more. So that's the thing you guys need to take away from this podcast is instead of taking one stream of income and started adding multiple streams of selling homes, renting homes, buying parks, selling parks, consulting. I mean, those are all ways of him making income for himself and his company and his family for generations, because he's not stuck in one mindset of I can only have one income and then go home and try to be on the internet for hours instead of trying to figure out ways to grow yourself by adding ways to increase your income. That's great, Ryan. Could you give us a little bit about I mean, I know you mentioned a little bit about the first park. Was that the first park, the 42 spaces that you bought? Was that your first deal?
Our first deal was in Hillsborough, North Carolina. It was 89 lots.
Wow.
I can tell you a quick story about that.
Sure.
So we found this deal through a broker. So a couple other ways we find deals, by the way. Brokers are fantastic sources. Networking.
Sure.
Direct outreach, obviously. And then you've got LoopNet and actually Facebook. We got a lead on Facebook recently, which was interesting. So there's a lot of different ways, unconventional ways you can find properties on market and off market. But our first mobile home park was in Hillsborough, North Carolina. We actually found that through a broker. We got it off market, which was pretty cool. So before it hit market, we made an offer on it, and we called. It was 40 banks, and we got 40 no's. It was brutal. By the way, this property in the 2.5 years that we've owned it, we have gotten 2 unsolicited LOIs. One for, I think it was $850,000 more than we bought it. One for $1 million more than we bought it. This property has been an absolute home run.
Wow.
And even still, we had 40 no's from 40 banks. Brutal. And it was a good learning lesson for us because we really realized how difficult it was going to be. It's difficult but possible, right? So that's my big thing on my podcast is I want to encourage folks to keep going, but know up front it's going to be really hard. So what we ended up having to do was pull a relationship. So basically what we wanted to do was partner up with someone who already had the experience. So that's exactly what we did. We found an operator we were comfortable with. We had plenty of conversations with. We understood each other, and I'm proud to say that they delivered on everything they said they were going to deliver on. So I was pretty happy with that because I've heard some horror stories. So I was pretty happy with that. But basically we viewed our first deal as, hey, let's do a training. Just do it training wheels. Let's partner up with someone who's done this many times, and basically they tasked us with getting the funding, which the debt, which obviously we failed, and they ended up having to pull a favor. But that's a really important story, I think, for many reasons, because I was in my 20s when that happened, as was Ian. I'm 31 now, Ian's 28. Mm-hmm. And that was, I was in my 20s when we found that. So basically the bank was looking at it like, Ian and Ryan are 20-something. They have very little money. Sure, Ryan's got a fancy-dancy master's degree, but so what? Everybody said no. So we had to pull a favor. And I think that's really important because keep in mind that when you look at people who are rocking and rolling within any industry, typically what you only hear are their highlight reels, right? So the 360-degree dunk or posterizing someone. You see that and you don't see the time in the gym or the time watching film or the time at practice or the time where they have to overcome something with their teammate or their coach, or they might be traded, or X, Y, and Z happens. Exactly. Like if you're a sports fan like me, it sounds like whatever's going on with Anthony Davis down in New Orleans is just a disaster for that team, right? So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that never makes it there. And when you listen to podcasts and read books and talk to people, a lot of times that's left out. And I think it's a really important story to know for all y'all listeners is that I failed hard. Oh my gosh. It is really, it's hard to hear one no, much less 40. 40. It's embarrassing to have to go to your investor partner who you want to impress because you look up to them and go, I failed 40 times. Yeah. Can you pull a favor? Right? Yeah. But if you can put that humiliation and embarrassment and shame to the side and keep going, the reward is there.
Oh, I mean, I think there's a great quote that says, before every success, there has to be failure. Like it's not, you can't avoid it. You can't avoid it. So, and I think the fact that you went through 40 no's, I mean, be honest, Ryan, don't you appreciate it a lot more because you know where you came from?
It's funny when we started. Yeah. Ian and I said, you know what? We're starting with nothing, but man, isn't this going to feel great and be a great story one day if we make it big?
See?
And yeah, I mean, that'll be a cool story. But at the time, and really a couple years into it, I had been like, yeah, but right now it'd be nice if we had a lot of money.
Of course.
It'd just be easier, right?
Of course.
And after this episode that I wrote, that I'm going to release later this afternoon, starting with nothing, I think I really realized why, to answer your question, why I'm actually glad I started with nothing. Because there were so many things I had to learn, because there were so many obnoxious hurdles that would have been so easy to jump if I had experience, or if I was older, or if I had more money, or if I had X, Y, and Z that I didn't have, that I had to find a way to overcome, that basically trained my mind to go, look, if I could overcome this, it doesn't really matter what's put in front of me. I can find a way to do it. And if anything in this life that's good is hard to get, otherwise everyone would do it. So to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. And it's more than just that we had nothing and we were starting with nothing, and sure, it would have been nice to do X, Y, and Z, but at the end of the day, I feel accomplished. And I just didn't feel that way on any of my former jobs where I was on salary, or even when I was a commission-only salesperson. So in March of 2011, I sold 30 cars that month. It was insane. I basically sold a car a day. And on April 1st, I was nothing, right? And it was back to square one. And so even then, when you're like, I'm starting with nothing, I have no cars sold in March. Oh my gosh, look how many cars I sold. Now it's back to square one, April 1st. Here, it's not like that. Here, I have equity in 8 mobile home parks right now. And I had a really tough January for a whole lot of reasons. And I was really down on myself for a lot. But at the end of the day, I know some of the things that I've done are really meaningful. And I found that meaning. I filled that hole in my soul, right? Because I'll give you a couple examples. We just accepted our first scholarship recipient, which is so exciting. It's not a whole lot of money. We want to scale it up, but to be able to put a low-income person in college and at least help pay for it means so much to me. To be able to give back, that is, I just, man, that has made me happier than anything else.
Wow.
And another big thing we're doing is we've teamed up with PayLease, and what that'll allow folks to do is pay online. And every time they pay online, it positively reports to their credit. And that is really, really cool, because when you think about anytime you've ever rented anything, that's one of your biggest bills every month, if not your biggest bill. And unless you have a mortgage, it does not go to your credit. And
Exactly.
a lot of folks are living in mobile home parks because they don't have good credit or any credit. And for me to be able to report only positive, to be able to report to my tenants' credit and help them build their credit, that means so much to me, to be able to help them to do that.
Wow.
So, and not only that, I get to cut trees down and fix potholes and fix skirting and get bad people, crime out, and bring in good families. There's just so much joy there that if I make millions of dollars and I get to retire to the Bahamas one day or something like that, I don't think the money is going to be what I talk about. And I think, so there's a good thing in psychology called the Hedonic Treadmill, where they basically say, you go out, you buy a BMW for a month or two, you're ecstatic, but then it just becomes part of your life, and you're back to square one, right? And so for me, I interviewed, for example, Mike Conlin of Affordable Communities Group in one of my recent episodes, and he kind of alludes to this, that for him, serving on the board of Wake Technical College is so meaningful to him, doing his free food giveaways, because a lot of his residents, so he had the courage to go and face his residents face to face. And what he learned was a lot of his folks, at the end of the month, they are deciding between rent, food, and medicine. And so he was so moved by that he started his free food giveaways at all of his properties. And then he does like coaching the youth basketball team. And what he finds in his life now is, it's really like, getting a new deal is fun. Don't get me wrong. Making a bunch of money is fun. And doing things that other people can't do and having your skills come to fruition is being in the zone, quote unquote, is really, really fun. But at the end of the day, what's really more meaningful and what really brings you true happiness is helping others. And for me, I think when I'm facing retirement or when I'm on my deathbed one day, I think what I'm going to reminisce about is about all the people that I've helped. And to me, that's the hole in my soul that I've found I am able to fill by helping people through my skills and my tenants and really my customers to give back to them, as well as make a profit myself. Everybody is better off at the end of the day. That to me makes me so happy and helps me get through really tough times.
Wow, Ryan. I mean, that, like I said, you always mention great points. For me, I do the same thing. I remember we talked a little bit earlier, and the same reason I started this podcast is the same thing that Ryan's doing with land lease, giving back in terms of credit to help people build their credit. Because I started this podcast for those people who I saw coming into my units that didn't have good credit, didn't have a house, didn't know how to build themselves. And I said, you know what? If I have the information, I can give it away. I've read the books, I've done the research, I've done these things, and I can give away information, and I can bring on guests who've done great things like you, Ryan, and you can drop knowledge on the people because you've done it, you've gone through the hurdles, they can learn from you, and it's great that you've given back in terms of, free knowledge. You're giving back in terms of housing, you're giving back in terms of fixing the neighborhood, giving back in terms of the community. You're giving back in terms of that scholarship now, helping people build their credit. People need to understand this. Like, for people like who, I don't want to say so-called made it, the greatest thing is to give back. Tony Robbins says that, the greatest gift is to give somebody else, is to give. So it doesn't sound superficial because it's not like we're trying to make stuff up. It's really true. Like, when you start giving back to people and you start trying to help people, like we try to help the people that are around us, which are the people that we work with, the people that work for us, people that live in our units. We try to help people you actually realize that you're going to get everything that you want. Don't you realize that, Ryan? Like, you end up getting everything you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Someone said this, and I thought it was great. They were like, "You will never go broke helping others." In so many words, and it's so true.
Yeah, it's so true, and that's what Ryan's been doing now for years, and he's going to continue doing. And Ryan, I don't see you retiring anytime soon, man. You love the business too much. I don't see you doing.
I love being busy. That's true.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see you doing any type of maybe a couple of vacations here and there, maybe mini retirements, but I know you're not going to be away from the business. And actually, so like we mentioned about, buying the mobile homes themselves, trying to fix them up yourself and trying to rent them and try to, flip them yourself. You can make money that way. You can make money by buying smaller parks in, finding a targeted market, like Ryan mentioned, and starting to really focus your time on getting to know brokers, get to look online, find ways to, for yourself to try to grow yourself so you can understand the business, because you don't want to jump in eyes closed. I mean, we're telling you about one business, but it might not be your business. So Ryan and I are in kind of the same business, so we could talk about it because that's our specialty. But we want to give to those people who may be on the fence of maybe trying to buy a house, or maybe trying to start a business, or maybe trying to build themselves up. We're telling you that you can do this. Yes, there's fear. Yes, there's issues. Yes, there's going to be 40, 50 no's, but you can do this. I mean, I've done it myself. Ryan's done it. His partners have done it. He knows a lot of people have started from zero. His recent episodes come in talking about starting from zero. So it doesn't matter where you are. You could be from Canada down to Mexico, wherever you are. You can do something. You can do something. That's what Ryan's kind of pushing forward. So Ryan, could you tell us a little bit more about, I know you create value by fixing up the homes and stuff like that. Is there any other methods that people can learn about, like the way you do business, that can help us in terms of psychology and business, and that kind of combination?
Absolutely.
Please.
So actually, I would love to start with one of my favorite quotes of all time.
Sure.
Of Marcus Aurelius, where he said, in so many words, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Mind-blowing quote. Mind-blowing quote. But that was kind of what I alluded to earlier, where, I got 40 no's, but what I discovered through that process, by not having a lot of money or a lot of experience up front, what I discovered through that process was that getting these seemingly insurmountable obstacles thrown my way and being unrelenting, fighting my way through that, has made it easier for the next time that I run into a ridiculous obstacle, right? So the obstacle has become the way. And a big part of psychology and a big part of being mindful and understanding yourself and who you are is basically learning how you can overcome the psychological ridiculousness that's thrown at you. So just a little bit of cognitive psychology. Any stimulus that your body absorbs, be it from your eyesight to your taste, everything goes through your amygdala before it gets to your prefrontal cortex. So let me kind of dissect that for a second. Your amygdala is what everybody in the neuroscience field tends to point to what the emotion factory is in the human body. And the prefrontal cortex is basically what everybody in the neuroscience says is where you do your thinking, your rational thought. Sure. So in other words, no matter what, anytime you absorb something from the world, you will always react emotionally before you have a chance to think. And that's really important, because the human brain has a way of backwards rationalizing. Especially if you get defensive about something. You see this in politics, not that I ever want to talk politics. I hate politics. But you see that everywhere in politics right now, are people doing these ridiculous mental gymnastics that to them makes perfect sense, but to anybody from the outside, it's ridiculous. And the reason why that happens is because you react emotionally to something, be it a school shooting or whatever happens in the world. You react emotionally, and then you backwards justify. And what happens in real estate, so I'll give you a good for example. We found out that a seller was lying to us. in the middle of due diligence, and we had two things going against us. We had number one, consistency bias, because our banker called us up and he's like, all we got to do is sign on the line. It's done. You got the loan. Everything, survey's done. Everything's done. All you got to do is sign. But we found something at the last hour, at the last minute. So we had a lot of consistency bias, sunk cost bias. But at the same time, we had this guttural, oh, I'm so mad. I'm so mad that we found out he was lying to us about a faulty well. And so it was like we had two things that we had to go through emotionally. But at the same time, no one is going to look after you like you. So we had to put aside all of this emotion, and we ultimately decided to pass on the deal. We lost several $1,000s that we're never going to get back, but we're glad we did for a bunch of reasons. But the reason why I say all this is because emotional intelligence is two things. It's number one, being able to see a situation, diagnose it, and persuading people where you need to persuade or negotiate where you need to negotiate, and kind of see the matrix, so to speak, to see beyond the superficial words and to see at the actions and the underlying motivations behind those actions, being able to manipulate your world to align incentives. But also it's to understand yourself. Because if you understand when you're just being mad, so for example, my business partner last night, he was freaking out about something, and then I didn't have to say anything to him. He just, out of nowhere, he just texted me. He just went, you know what, I'm overreacting here. And then we had a really productive conversation. I think that's why we have a really good business partnership, because we're both very self-aware. We're both very in tune with our emotions. Now, we both have a lot of work to do on our respective. I don't think it'll ever be perfect, but Robert Greene talks about this in 48 Laws of Power. You need to be able to control your own emotions for a whole slew of reasons. But yeah, that's one big reason I think psychology, and Munger and Buffett talk about this at length. Big thing about psychology is being able to overcome your own emotions, to not go with the tide. Like they say when you study for your Series 7, the odd lots. The odd lots are people who tend to sell low and buy high, and they just follow the flock, and they don't ever end up making money in investment in the stock market because they're always selling and buying at the wrong times. And it's really, really difficult to be optimistic in times of fear, and it's really, really difficult to be fearful in optimistic times. And psychology is so important in that, and being able to understand yourself, to know when to fold them, so to speak, and know when to hold them, so to speak. But it's so important to know yourself and to be able to overcome your own emotions, to be able to diagnose when you're being afraid, and to be able to diagnose when you're being overly optimistic. Because ultimately, your brain, you can be super duper smart and still make really stupid decisions because you fall into the trap of emotions.
That's huge, Ryan. I mean, that's one thing that I think a lot of people don't take as serious as they should, is their emotions. It's one of the most powerful things, and they could either help you or hinder you. And a lot of people, I mean, I'm a big sports fan too, like yourself. And I realized that, a lot of people think that you need to play angry to play well. It's so crazy, so they don't understand that controlling emotions actually controls your body, controls your movements, controls your speed, controls your tempo, controls your pace. And I think it's the same thing in terms of just life in general. I mean, I have an uncle, and just a quick story. He's the most peaceful guy. He's the most, you'd never think, but he gets in a car and he turns into somebody else. So, and it's, the road rage. Yeah, the road rage is just.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. And I always thought he can never control these emotions, which is gonna, cause him to get in an accident or something, something which I don't want to think about. But it's so bad because you can see the negative in terms of, like you said, your partner. He knew he was overreacting as soon as it happened. It's the same way you should with yourself, especially listeners. You need to learn to understand your body, not only your emotions, but you need to learn how to control them. Yes, you could be mad, but doesn't mean you have to actually, feel into that emotion of I'm mad. Take 30 seconds, walk away, do whatever you need to do, and then understand it's just an emotion. You don't have to act on it. Great stuff, Ryan. Anything else you want to kind of give more in terms of business psychology?
Oh man, we could talk for hours about it. I think one one pretty cool thing, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this, and I think it's Blink.
Yes.
His book, Blink. He talks about how basically what happens when adrenaline kicks in, fight, flight, your adrenaline kicks in, you get tunnel vision, and basically what your brain does is it jettisons anything it deems unnecessary. So you can basically hyper-focus on whatever you need to stay alive. What is it? Fight, flight, or flee? And he gives two examples. One of which was one of which was a sports example, and one of which was a flight example where an inexperienced pilot ended up crashing and passing away because he was inexperienced and his fight or flight kicked in, and he didn't have the muscle memory. He had to use a lot of his prefrontal cortex to logic through things. Like, think about the first time you ever brushed your teeth versus now. Like, now when you brush your teeth, you can be doing like 5 things at the same time because you've done it a million times, right? But your first time brushing your teeth, you were very methodical and you had to use a lot of your brain power to do it. But by the millionth time you brush your teeth, you don't think twice, right? So if you're fight or flight and you're inexperienced, you end up crashing your plane versus, I believe the other example he gave was maybe Magic Johnson or Larry Bird. It's clutch time in the basketball game. The adrenaline rush is hitting. Everything else is shut down, and all your brain function is going to what you know how to do best. And I think it's really important to be able to. So I got my black belt when I was in high school in karate, and one really important lesson that I learned amongst a whole slew of lessons there is every white belt doesn't realize they're a white belt. Right? It's not until you advance a little bit where you go, oh, wow, I was terrible. And it's really important to be self-aware, because if you hit that fight or flight and you're not able to calm yourself down and you don't have that muscle memory there, you can end up crashing. And that's really important because I had my life threatened once at one of our properties. And I ended up, thankfully, diffusing the situation and getting the guy out of there. Now, he ended up going to jail very shortly thereafter. So whatever I did worked. That's a whole long other story. But talk about having your adrenaline kicking in.
Sure.
But here's the thing. I've negotiated for years. I've had to, at the car dealership, oh my gosh, as you can imagine, you deal with people with just outrageous emotions, anger, fear, the works. So I've had a lot of experience in kind of bringing people down into the realm of rationality. You know, people drunk on emotions. I've diffused 10 situations and helped people come to their own, like, let me think through this logically, let me put emotions to the side, right? It's a big part of sales. And when that moment hit and it was fight or flight response, if I did not have those skills, I maybe would not be talking to you right now.
Wow.
And I think it's really, really important because but at the same time, I knew this is my skill set. If anybody can diffuse the situation, it's me. And thankfully I was right. But if I didn't have those skills and I was the white belt, the novice, the unconscious incompetence, you're not good and you don't know you're not good, kicks in. You could be that flight pilot that crashes into the sea or the mountain or wherever, because you are taking on all these skills that you just don't have and you don't know you don't have them. So the most important psychological step in my mind, other than knowing yourself and being able to control your own emotions, is also being able to go, you know what? I don't know a lot of stuff. Let me try to uncover let me figure out my unknown unknowns and make them known unknowns. Because as soon as you identify what skills you don't have, what things you don't know, then you can start figuring those things out. And then you can start building skills. And then you morph into conscious incompetence. And then you go to unconscious competence where you're good and you don't know it. And then eventually you get conscious competence where you're good and you know it. And that's obviously where you want to be. But whenever you're starting it, myself included, when you don't know you are not good at something, you've got to, as quickly as you can, figure out your known unknowns and quickly get into the conscious incompetence. So that way you don't get into a situation where you are just completely exposed, and you could get taken for a lot of money, or have your life hurt, or be injured, or have other people injured. So that's really big amongst a whole slew of other things we could talk about for hours. I think that's
great. That's great, Ryan. That's excellent, because the whole concept pretty much of this podcast is invest in your future. And the way you invest in your future is what's Ryan talking about right there, which is learning that you don't know everything, learning that you can get better, and learning on how to get better, so you can be, you could have more value, you can make more money, but you could also control more projects. You can understand, hey, this is what it's going to take in order to be successful. This is what it's going to take in order for me to diffuse this situation. But if you don't know how to do these certain things, how to build credit, how to start, write up a, partnership agreement, how to work with lawyers, how to work with accountants. Yes, you might not be familiar with it right now, just the way Ryan's talking about. You might not know these skills, you might not have these skills, but you can build on them by working on them slowly and continuously, because this is what it's done for both of us. I mean, Ryan is a big believer in personal development. Same myself. We preach it. In his podcast, my podcast, the name of this podcast is Invest in Your Future. But you need to invest in your future by taking these steps that we give you and implementing them into your life. That's the only way you're going to get better, is you have to improve yourself. So thank you, Ryan, for mentioning that. So now let's go into the top 5 here, ending up the podcast here. And my top 5 here, these 5 questions are kind of my personal questions right now, and the other questions were more for people who want to, learn about the business. But these are the top 5 that I feel like I've always wanted to know, especially of everyone who's successful. So my first one is, what's your number one habit that contributes to your success, would you say?
Perseverance. If that's a habit, definitely perseverance. So trying to figure out a good way to explain a lot in a really short period of time. I think that I'll give you a good for example. So for Spanish, I have this app called Duolingo. It's a free app. I have it on insane mode, which is 15 minutes a day, give or take. And every single day, I hit 600 days in a row today. And I think it's really, really important, because 15 minutes in one day is not a lot. 15 minutes per 600 days in a row, that's a lot. And the app tells you 34 hours of Duolingo is equivalent to an entire semester in college. Wow. So I can't do the math. I'm not good at mental math, but 600 days times 15 minutes, if you do the math, I've done probably several semesters, maybe 2 or 3 semesters, shooting from the hip, guessing, of Spanish just by doing it 15 minutes a day. Now, I know that sounds like a little thing, but just doing that builds your willpower to be able to. Willpower is like a muscle, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of things I love about what I do, and there's a lot of things that are really challenging for me. Like, for example, it takes a lot of willpower for me to cold call. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love sales. I love talking to people, but it takes a lot of willpower. And I know my willpower is strongest in the morning. So every morning I'm on the phone, no matter what. Before my day gets started, I am cold calling owners. Mm-hmm. And I'm able to do that because of my habit of perseverance and because of slowly building that willpower every single day, because once a day goes a long way. It is better to do a little bit every day and slowly let it snowball than it is to sprint and then stop.
So perseverance, that's a number one habit that I'd say is almost, you have to have it. You have to, because pretty much behind that is just failure. If you don't persist, when you stop moving, that's when you actually fail. So that's great, right? And that's actually a great point too, of the compounding of learning Spanish or working on that app for 15 minutes a day for 2 days, 3 days is not going to make a difference. But by 600 days, I mean, now you said you're pretty much fluent in it, right? Wouldn't you say? Like, that's impressive.
It's fluent, but es un desastre. Yo puedo hablarlo, pero es totalmente un desastre, especialmente mi acento. I sound awful.
But it makes sense.
It's horrible, but it works.
It works.
I can't tell you how important it is to be able to look someone in the face and say, "Yo soy el dueño de esta propiedad." So I'm the owner of this property. To meet them, to shake their hand, and to speak in their own language. Not to get political, but you hear a lot of times people going, "Well, this is our country, and you should come here and learn our language." And although that may be true, and I'm Irish, that's where my country of origin, and I'm also Polish and Lithuanian, and my ancestors had to learn English when they came here. My great grandmother from Poland, she didn't speak a word of English when she went through Ellis Island and then up to Connecticut. She didn't speak a word of English. Yeah, she had to learn it. But here's the thing: although that may be right, that people ought to come here and learn our language, although that may be right, that will not get you paid. At the end of the day, you can complain about how other people aren't doing X, Y, and Z, or you could adjust and you can learn another language, and then you can profit where others aren't. So yeah, you can espouse that theory and not be wrong, but oh my gosh, that is not getting you paid.
You got to get paid. If you want to get paid, learn another language. Right there. There's a tip right there. Nice little tip from Ryan. Want to get paid? Learn another language. Great stuff, Ryan. For my next question, what's the most exciting project you're currently working on right now?
Oh man, I'm working on a lot of fun things, man. I think obviously my scholarship is when I almost start crying. I know it sounds weak. I know as a culture we want to be tough men, but I almost started crying when I was drafting up the email because I was just so ecstatic. So that's really exciting. My podcast is very fulfilling too because I really like helping people, and I'm not selling anything. I'm not looking for investors with it. I'm just doing my main reason for doing my podcast, amongst a whole bunch of different reasons I'm doing it, is I want to help people, and I want to encourage people to keep going. So for me, that's a really exciting project that I'm working on, and just growing my business. I mean, to be able to buy a property, make it safer, get criminals out, bring in good families who really need affordable housing, helping them build their credit. That to me is really exciting. It's so cool to have my passion match something I can be really good at, and I can make money, and I can help others all in the same time. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, I had a really, really tough last couple weeks, but I woke up this morning ecstatic to get to work.
Nice.
So that to me is wealth. Whether I'm a millionaire or not, to me, that's just a statistic. To me, real wealth is to have that motivation to get up every day and to find fulfillment and meaning and purpose in what I do.
That's great, Ryan. I mean, you have a lot of positive stuff going on. And I can understand why you're so proud of that, because it's something that you've created, and from where you've come from. I mean, it's nothing but to be proud of. So that's nothing wrong with being emotional about that. For one of my other top 5 here is, so we talked about a lot of positives, a lot of negatives, but this one's really, because in terms of, I mean, everyone has these failures, but I was going to say, what's the worst, I want to say deal, but maybe, it could be a worse deal or worse mistake that's cost you a lot of money, maybe cost you a lot of time. And what did you learn from it? If you could possibly, give us one of those.
Yeah, I actually have an episode about that called Due Diligence Nightmare, where basically we found out that we didn't think to check the water bills on the property.
Oof,
and
yeah.
Basically we bought a property that had some absurd water leak, and we didn't see it up front. Now, we probably still would have bought the property anyway.
Sure.
But that was a punch to the gut. I've also recently bought a mobile home that fell apart, and the guy basically has left me out to dry. I'll probably end up losing about $4,000 there.
Wow.
I hired the wrong contractor. Let me just nugget here. Don't ever hire. The thing about getting a repave done, don't ever hire someone who isn't really good at it, because what I've seen in the road paving business is you are either really, really good at it or you're awful. And there's no middle ground there. And when you find a road paver who is good at what they do, you wait. I mean, I've got a couple road pavers that are outstanding, and I wait months for their work, because one of the first times I ever hired a road paver was about a year ago. He basically took, I think it was $4,310 from me that I never saw again, just gone.
Wow.
And we ended up having to go to the local detective to report fraud. It turns out this guy had a warrant for his arrest. But the good news is we did a bunch of things right. We had his social security number, his address, his phone number. We signed a contract with us. So we had all the evidence. Basically, I just one or two emails to the detective, and a couple months later, he's in jail.
Wow. Yeah.
Because apparently he did this to a couple other folks. So yeah, I've made a ton of mistakes, and I'm going to continue to make mistakes. And the cool thing is I found the right investor who's willing to kind of stomach my growing pains. And it's important to know, back to what I was saying earlier about the car dealership and the sales manager being incentivized to lie to your sales manager. It's so important to be able to admit you made a mistake, because it's so easy to just get trapped in the, I'm going to defend my own ego and get defensive, and that's not productive. It is so much. I almost take pride in going, my self-esteem is so strong, I'm willing to admit that I made a mistake. In fact, I would prefer to take responsibility, because that almost is like strength to me. Because once you do that, even with your own employees, by the way, to go, even when it's obvious that they made a mistake, to go, you know what, I didn't train you on this. This is my mistake. You'll find that eventually they'll go, you know what, you didn't train me, but come on, I should have had common sense to do this. Then, boom, you avoid all of this negative stuff. You circumvent the ridiculous emotions that are going to, have these ridiculous mental gymnastics, and you can get to it. So, yeah, I mean, if you can admit that you made a mistake, oh my gosh, it sets you up to rectify about any situation. So, yeah, plenty more mistakes I can talk about too, by the way.
I think we all have plenty on our list. I mean, my list is pretty long too. I mean, on the finance side, on bad due diligence. I mean, that's one thing you guys can learn from Ryan right now is you're gonna make mistakes, but learn from them also. Try not to repeat them. It's gonna happen no matter how many mentors, how many books you read, how many podcasts you listen to, how many videos you watch. You're gonna make your own mistakes, but you try to avoid them, obviously. But try to learn from them. And the way we both learn from each other is you listen to somebody else's mistake and try not to copy it. That's one thing I learned is just try not to copy somebody else's mistake, especially if you learn from them that, hey, don't do this, follow proper due diligence, and you get a good deal. You get a good, good property. So that's a great thing to learn. And my final one here, Ryan, for me, who would you say is the most influential person to you today? Or like a mentor to you? Like, who would you say number one that comes to mind?
Oh God, that's so hard, because there's so many people that have just been invaluable to me. I mean, my social studies professor for my sophomore year in high school lit the flame that made me, I think if you asked him, he would tell you that I always had that charcoal there waiting to be ignited. And sure, he might have been the match to ignite that, but it was always there. But he's a very influential person to me, even though I haven't talked to him in years. One of my best friends, Mike Conlon, who I interviewed on my podcast, he has taught me so much. So I've got to say, he's extraordinarily influential to me. I've had my investor partner I alluded to earlier has just been invaluable to me. And then there's professors, there's friends, there's former bosses, there are people I invited to my wedding. There's so many. I think if you were to say who's the most influential, and then obviously there are people I haven't met before that I've read their books and I've absorbed their content. That's been very influential to me. I think the most influential person to me is whomever convinced me, because it wasn't myself, whomever was the person to convince me to start meeting people and start learning. Whomever that was, be it my my high school social studies professor, world history teacher, whether it was him or someone along the way, that was the person who taught me that I can do it. I just have to go out there and read and learn and educate myself. Whomever that was the person who made it all possible.
It's true. I love the comparison. Say, the person who lit your flame. That's great. So yeah, Ryan, I mean, thank you so much for your time. For me, I want to really, first of all, just say thank you, just first of all, for taking time out of your busy schedule and running a business to come on here and help my guests out in terms of mindset, in terms of learning how to find your passion, find a way to fill that void. Because like we said, real estate might not be a thing, but if it is, I hope you learn so much from this podcast, because Ryan is a wealth of knowledge. First, actually, Ryan, could you tell us a little bit more about your podcast? And I love the title, Mobile Homes for Real Life. Mobile home parks for real life. Could you tell us a little bit more about those and what kind of I know you have a new episode dropping. Is it Friday, I believe?
Yeah, tomorrow it'll drop at midnight tonight.
Yeah, definitely.
Starting with nothing.
I'd
love to talk about it.
Sure, definitely. Please.
To talk about it.
Please.
MHP IRL, mobile home parks in real life. And basically the reason I started it is because I realized that all of the content out there was really hype, and there's some good substance in there, but they brush over really big things like, oh, hey, yeah, if you want a contractor, just call down the list, and there you have a contractor. And, oh, my gosh, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, it can be so hard to find good help. And I've been burned by people that have good reviews online, are licensed, bonded, and insured. I've been burned by people that check every single box, and the opposite. I've had people where I've taken a risk on and they've crushed it for me. So I talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but ultimately, if I was to summarize what I do on my podcast, I'm going to teach you that it is really, 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 really hard, but you can do it. And I hope you walk away with two things. A little bit of fear, but a lot of bit of excitement, because you can do it. And I want to discourage slumlords too. That's another big part of what I do, because what I found is in mobile home parks in general, when the kind of hype is, oh yeah, it's a passive investment, you can buy it, and it's really, you set it and forget it. Well, what that's going to do is that's going to attract a lot of people who are just going to ultimately be slumlords, and I don't think that's fair to the residents. And I also don't think that's fair to people who are genuinely seeking good people that are looking for a passive investment. So that's what I do. I'm easy to find, y'all. Ryan Narus. My last name is spelled N like Nancy, A-R-U-S, so N-A-R-U-S. If you Google me, it's the first thing to come up. Mobile home parks in real life. It's there. Another really big thing I want to leave your audience with, by the way,
yes,
is if I had a great question asked to me recently, which was, if you were starting over, what would you do differently? And my honest answer to that is I would just do more of what I did. That's it. Because I feel like what I did, I made a lot of mistakes, but you're supposed to make mistakes. Yeah, there are a few things I could have done to make things go more efficiently. But and I lost the money here and there. But that money that you lose is like tuition. You're paying for that education. You're failing, and that's building character, right?
Yes.
But I can distill everything when I started, and even when and even now, still today, I can distill everything down into 4 buckets: learning, networking, sacrificing, and mindfulness. Learning, you want to learn everything you can. Listen to every podcast you can, buy audiobooks, read actual books, read the blogs, watch the videos, absorb all content that you can. Network. People, I'll give you a good quick example.
Sure.
I got a guy right now I can call up, and he can get about any title passed through the DMV. And the DMV is awful. You go there, you sit forever, only for them to tell you didn't get this signed, or that was done wrong, or this, and then they kick you out, and it's all over again. It would be so much easier to give this guy $25 and he goes and does it for you, because he has a relationship there and he knows how to circumvent the bureaucracy. it's like that, but for deals. Some of my best friends in the industry, I have made them a bunch of money, and they've made me money too. And we skip a bunch of rigmarole because we know different things and how to do different things, and we share ideas. Iron sharpens iron. Network. If you meet 100 people and you give your time to 100 people, and only one of them helps you in return, that one person may make everything else worth it. And then the last two, I already talked about mindfulness and why that's important, to know yourself and to know the holes in your soul, so to speak, but also sacrificing. Y'all, I have made some huge sacrifices. Huge sacrifices. For 14 months, every other week, I lived in a mobile home on a blow-up mattress, miles away from my wife and my friends, with nothing to do but work. That was a big ask. Cutting my salary less than in half to chase a dream, signing up recourse debt. There's so many sacrifices that I've made to get to where I am today that you have to be, I mean, obviously you got to be smart when you make a sacrifice, but you cannot move forward unless you take risk and you make sacrifices, and you just got to be mentally prepared to make those sacrifices. So those are my four.
Wow.
Learning, networking, sacrificing, and being mindful.
Wow. Learning, networking, mindfulness, and sacrifice. I mean, if you guys don't learn something from Ryan, I mean, those are things you should learn right there. That's important. I mean, each one of them, I think, holds a certain amount of power too, because it helps you in so many ways. I mean, if you don't know the knowledge, you're never going to go after it. If you don't have the sacrifice, you're not going to do it, even if you know the knowledge. You know, if you don't have the mindfulness, you don't even know what you're going to go after. And I mean, this is just obviously, and you have to network. I mean, there's a great saying too, Ryan. Everything that you want, someone else has it. Whether it be money, whether it be a project, whether it's a house, a mobile home park, apartment building, furniture, somebody else has it. So you have to network. I mean, great stuff, Ryan. I appreciate that. And how can guys reach out to you? If people want to reach out to you, and maybe, I don't know if you want to give all your email or your number, but how can people reach out to you if they wanted to, get in touch with you and maybe talk a little bit further, maybe just contact and network with you?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I can't thank you enough. I thoroughly enjoyed this. You kick butt, by the way. If you haven't looked him up, look him up, because he's done some great things too. I'm flattered at all the nice things that you're saying, but it's both ways, man. You really got it going on. But to find me, seriously, just Google me.
Okay.
Narus, N like Nancy, Ryan Narus, RYAN. Find me on LinkedIn. Perfect. Find my website, archimedesgrp.com. You can email me directly through there. Most of my contact information is on LinkedIn and there. Yes. Find me. Yes. Seriously, I am here to help. I'm in my car all the time, and I'm an outgoing person. I love to talk. Sure. I would love to get to know you, even if you do not provide me anything. I don't care. I still would love to see if I can help you. I'm a giver, man. I love helping people out. Same here, Ryan. Same here. That's why I asked you to come on be a guest on my podcast, because I knew we had similar vibes, similar energies. And I mean, I plan on, really, to be honest, guys, my audience, I plan on probably doing some business with this guy, because this guy's a smart man. He has the psychology major. He has, business, and he knows a lot of things. He knows a lot of people. He has great contacts. I mean, Ryan is a great gentleman. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And I'm going to put all your information in the show notes about your website, about your LinkedIn, so they can get in contact with you. And guys, thank you guys for joining me again for another episode, Invest in Your Future. You can reach out to us at info@kirundagroup.com, or find us on any YouTube, social media, anywhere you find us. Ask us a question. We appreciate it. And the guys coming from Brazil and India, thank you guys. I appreciate you guys. And thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. And until next time, guys, have a good one. Thank you again. Oh, Ryan, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Oh, we're done. But that was, I mean, oh my goodness. It's a little longer than we were expecting, but no, it's really actually, yeah, it's fun to be an hour. But listen, I can't, if it's just going and it's flowing, I don't mind. I don't mind at all, because it's so informative, and it's going to be there forever. Once we put it up, it's going to be there forever, and people can pick up from. I mean, that last part about the buckets, that was great, right? That was that was fantastic, man. Fantastic. I mean, I got so many comments here on Facebook. I mean,
We had about 60 people on Facebook. Had some people on Instagram, about 50 people on Instagram. I'm going to put up the podcast on everything, on iTunes, on Anchor, and everywhere. So you're going to have access to it. I'm going to put all the information, the show notes about yourself and about your business a little bit, and your websites and everything. So, Ryan, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Dude, I love it. We'll definitely do some business, man. And next time I'm in the Boston area, or if I can convince you to come back down south, man, I look forward to meeting you face to face.
Oh, definitely. I want to make a trip. I want to make a trip down there because I do want to look at some parks. And I want to. What I'm trying to do, I have a property up here. Actually, do you have some time right now? We can talk a little bit, or do you have to go?
I got a couple minutes.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So I have I'm trying to get a property up here. I'm gonna refinance, take out some equity, and I'm looking to get like at least 200,000 out, and maybe do something that, buy, maybe partner together or something, or maybe have something in the pipeline that you don't want, or might be coming up. I'm looking for something like 100 space park, or 50 to 60 to 100 space park in the North Carolina, South Carolina area that that we can bring in some nice income if possible.
I'm glad you asked, because so a lot of times I will find a property that doesn't, for whatever reason, fit my needs and my overall strategy. Not that it's not a good property that would be a good fit for someone else and someone else's strategy. So
exactly.
I'll explain. So like the way I explain it to my wife, Coca-Cola doesn't sell coffee. That doesn't mean that coffee is not outrageously profitable, right? Starbucks crushes it.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't Coca-Cola in coffee? It's because it doesn't fit their core strategy. Right? So like business school is littered with examples of, a good example, Pepsi. Pepsi bought Frito-Lay, and that was a mistake. And I think they're finally breaking up, because they're just two different cultures, and what it takes to be successful selling soda is different than chips. And, so in other words, there are a lot of,